Hello everyone, that's Titus and I'm Thomas, and this is Everyone is Bad at Magic, where we untap, upkeep, and punt. So, we've both taken a little bit of a vacation recently, and, well, my vacation hasn't been too strenuous. I've mainly been staying home and grinding standard on Arena. I understand that you've been playing a bit of Arena yourself, Titus. What's that been like for you?
Well, on my main primary account, it's been fun, but I've decided to take to task and create a secondary, and grinding a new account is not very fun if you're not sinking anything into it. Sure, they start you off with a few good cards, but like to build a functional deck, say for standard or maybe Pioneer on there, I really wish I had some more commons and uncommons.
That's fair. I mean, when you're building a standard deck, it's mainly rare mythics that you need wild cards for. I didn't even think about needing commons and uncommons. What kind of decks are you trying to build right now?
So right now I've been getting away like the fastest with mono red. Just putting in like, was it Lightning Burst or the one where you can kicker it for 4 damage and then Shock, Lightning Strike, even going with the Viashino, I think it's like Pyromancers and the Gitu Lava Runners. Look, we're just trying to cast some spells, meet our color challenges for the week, or kill opponents' creatures, and grind that goal till we have semi-functional decks.
Fair and reasonable. I mean, it's not like the old days where they were printing arena codes in every pack so that when you open something in paper, you had a little something to bring back to arena, which I kind of miss. It made it a little easier and a little more accessible to have a collection in both paper and digitally.
Exactly. This is doable, but is it enjoyable? Not so much.
Yeah, it really is a grind. I played a bit of standard last season, and last month I made it up to high platinum, even though I didn't have an optimized deck, because it's really hard to get enough wild cards just to flesh out a mana base. And I was playing Azorius aggro after the bans because standard's really fun right now. But that deck is not good enough to keep up with the new Simic deck, which basically does the exact same thing but better in every way. So I've been pivoting over to the Bant combo deck, and it is so hard to grind out just wild cards. It takes like 2-3 days to get a single one if you're just doing the challenges.
Fair enough. And I would concur.
Well, do you have any aspirations for decks that you want to play in Standard? I think the format's so fun right now, to the point where I'm considering maybe putting a paper deck together.
Fair enough. I like the, I've seen people promote the Is It Lessons deck, and I kind of like that one. I think that deck can be, built with some more costly cards, but in all honesty, there's like lower variants that realistically just, what is that banned card? Ancestral Recall? That's essentially what you get if you get enough lessons in your graveyard with that new 2-cost CMC spell. So I think it's a cool deck. I haven't quite tried it. On my main account, I do have, a few more things available to me since I've been playing this for a while on and off. And I also like the Azorius aggro list. I think that's kind of fun. Haven't dived into Simic counters, but who knows, maybe.
I'm not entirely sure what card you're talking about, so I'm trying to bring it up really quickly. I assume that that's in conjunction with Storm Chaser's talent.
I don't think you need to play the talent, and you can get away with Abandon attachments, which is the hybrid 2 CMC. You may discard a card and draw 2.
There's a big standard tournament coming out this weekend that I'm planning on watching pretty heavily because the format looks really cool right now. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah, I do think we may see a good amount of Simic and maybe some Is It Good stuff since drawing cards is pretty busted. And Quantum Riddlers.
Actually, Simic's not that heavily represented. They released the deck lists, and the Is It Lessons deck that you're referring to was 18% of the field. The Simic Ouroboros list that I'm talking about was only 5% of the field, so it's pretty wide open right now. We won't go too heavily into that because I'm going to want to talk about it pretty heavily next week.
Fair enough.
Once the tournament happens, but the fact that we have 6-7 decks that account for 75% of the meta at this point, where just a few short weeks ago, one deck was accounting for 75% of the meta. Standard is looking like it's in a much healthier place at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm clearly more standard build than you are right now, and that's okay. I've been playing more standard than cEDH, which is really weird for me.
You know, when you take a break from things, you kind of miss it. And I've been like on a magic hiatus outside of Arena, and I think that's where I would like to play some more either Commander or cEDH. And, you know, just take into consideration what I might want to do there.
Absolutely. Jumping into our main topic today, we're talking about one of the other 60 card formats that we're super interested in. This one is an internal format, though. It had one of its biggest tournaments of the year in Italy this past weekend, Paupergeddon. It was part of Eternal Weekend this year, Eternal Week in Europe, and it had a huge turnout. And Pauper's in a really cool place right now, where it is probably even more diverse than Standard, and it had a ton of different decks that showed up to play. So that happened in Italy, so we definitely were not able to show up for this, and there weirdly wasn't that much footage that was available on the internet. Starting off with Mono Blue Terror. If you want to check out any of these decks, we will leave links in the show notes so that you can come view them, copy them, make your own versions of these decks, if you will. The 8th place deck was Mono Blue Terror from Moravec. If I am mispronouncing any of these names, I apologize in advance. And do you want to walk us through this at all, Titus?
Sure. I feel like it's pretty standard. I don't think we've seen any new inclusions from Avatar. You can look, would we call this more so control, or would we call this more tempo?
So I would definitely say that this is a control deck. For most of our audience, who I assume are Commander players, which, you know, we're mainly cEDH players if we're honest, this is probably the control deck of the format. It revolves around heavily reduced creatures, or creatures that benefit from casting spells, so that you control the game early, and then later in the game you become inevitable. So the three main creatures in this deck being Tolarian Terror, Cryptic Serpent, and Delver of Secrets. The Tolarian Terror and Cryptic Serpent both cost less for the more instants and sorceries that you have in your graveyard. So you're really just casting these for 1 blue or 2 blue, respectively, usually on turn 3 or turn 4 after you've cycled through your different Thought Scours, your Sleep the Deads, your Ponders, your Brainstorms, filling up your graveyard so that your big beaters cost next to nothing. And then Delver Seekers, obviously a legacy staple in Pauper. You can cast for 1 blue, reveal the top card of your library at the beginning of your upkeep, and if it is a instant or sorcery, transform it into a 3/2 with flying.
So that is pretty relevant, especially on a turn 1 where you can put 3 damage on an opponent if you get a good reveal. The other thing is, too, you're able to run Brainstorm in this format, which means you can put a card back on top of your deck to kind of guarantee that effect. I think what you see in control decks is they kind of want to get to that late game, and then, like you said, the inevitable big ol' creature, and then they start putting down damage. And sometimes you can get it down relatively early. I mean, look at the cards like Thought Scour and Mental Note. You're filling up your graveyard. In addition, you also have Lorien revealed, which lets you get a land. You can do that at instant speed. And late game, it draws you 3 cards. And as it goes, this may not have hardcore destroy like black or red, or, kill, or exile like white, I don't know if, but boomerang. Like, getting a thing bounced, like, sometimes players can get a good benefit out of replaying something, right? ETBs, cast triggers, that sort of a thing. However, you do lose momentum, and it can be relatively influential in the game. The fact is, you can also play a lot of these spells at instant speed, meaning you can kind of decide when you want to do something. I think the main slow one is going to be your Sleep of the Dead. You know, besides Ponder just giving you that card draw and letting you see what's available.
100%. And if you boomerang a very impactful creature, you can also counterspell it on its way back down, which is also legal in Pauper, which is pretty awesome. I think Sleep of the Dead is a really cool inclusion. I don't think I've seen this in Blue Terror previously. It's not a deck that I play pretty heavily, so please don't come at me if this is a auto include. But I think this is a perfect tempo card for this type of deck because it taps a creature for essentially 2 turns so that you are basically buying yourself enough time to find your boomerangs, your snaps, which I'm really surprised that there are no snaps in this list. That's something I would have expected to see. If we go down to our sideboard, you'll see annuls. Annuls are super important in this format. There's a lot of artifacts that are important to be able to hit from decks like Tron or Affinity. Your Blue Elemental Blast to help you survive the Mono Red burn decks. Then you just have Dispels, Gut Shots, Hydro Blast, and Steel Sabotage. Steel Sabotage being relevant the same way that Annul is.
Gutshot is also a pretty relevant card. You would think that 1 damage isn't always the most impactful thing, but it is. There are a lot of creatures with 1 toughness, and sometimes there's the niche situations where your opponent has 1 health. Plus, being Phyrexian mana, pretty useful as well.
Yeah, costing 0 mana is always infinitely more useful than costing 1 mana, even if it is slightly less damage. I'd rather have a Gut Shot than a Lightning Bolt in cEDH. All right. And I'm just curious, what token do we need here? Oh, nothing. Cool. Well, that's fun. Well, congratulations to Moravec on top 8ing. Let's jump over to our 7th place deck, which is Cawgates from Bardi. So, full disclosure, I don't think either of us have ever played Cawgates, despite the fact that it won the last Paupergeddon. But this deck's freaking sweet. It kind of revolves around your creatures that either have evasion. In this case, your Guardian of Guildpact has protection from monocolored, so monocolored creatures can't block it. Lifelink for the Outlaw or a Sacred Cat. Or flying from your Squadron Hawks, which also get you more Squadron Hawks. And your Basilisk Gates, which is the namesake of the deck, where you can pay 2 and target creature gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of gates you control. And if you look through the mana base, we have 8, 10, 12, 16 gates that can come down throughout the game. We're also running some cards, as Titus pointed out earlier, like Lorien Revealed, as a way to flesh out our mana base. This unfortunately does not get any of the gates, but we'll get your idyllic beachfront, your islands, well, just those, and they serve as a late game reload. And you have Brainstorm, Counterspell, Prismatic Strands, and Thraben Charm as some good interaction.
And if you notice within the list, there are a lot of creatures with lifelink. I feel like lifelink is very impactful in Pauper when the format has a lot of burn decks. The other thing as well is you grind up a little bit more when you get a buff from your Basilisk Gate. But I think the general idea with these decks is, yes, you have incremental damage, but you're looking to survive until you can kind of throw down a haymaker. Really get those gates in play, and having a good suite of card selection when you got your Brainstorm, and also the Modern Age, which lets you draw a card, discard a card, and later becomes a creature, which can be used, being buffed by your Basilisk Gate. But yeah, the theme of like survive to the late game, having removal, even in the sideboard, if we'd like to jump down over there, we have more counter spells. And the other thing I've noticed about Pauper, how prominent Monarch is. That extra card, I think, plays a pivotal role.
Yeah, I don't know why I haven't played this deck before. This deck is 100% up my alley. I think I would really enjoy this style of play. Just trying to stay alive long enough to just become inevitable.
Spoken like a true control player.
I also really like Journey to Nowhere in this deck. When it ETBs exile target creature, until Journey to Nowhere leaves the battlefield. For 1 and a white, that just is a great effect.
Yep. And enchantments also kind of need to have opponents that have green or white, but they can also be bounced. Bouncing those, yeah.
Yeah,
better than getting destroyed.
Yeah, there's not too many things that interact with enchantments in this format other than the Thraben Charm that's directly next to it. All right, let's jump over to our next deck. Congrats, Bardi, on 7th place. Up next, we have Dimir Terror from... Oh, buddy. Kowalczyk? Sure. I apologize in advance. So, we have Dimir Terror. This is going to be somewhat similar to our Mono Blue Terror earlier, where you'll see that it is running Tolarian Terror in 4. You will also have the 4 Lorien Revealeds. But instead of having the Cryptic Serpents, we have 3 Gurmak Anglers and 4 Sneaky Snackers. Sneaky Snacker might be my favorite Pauper card. Just hands
solid.
Down. Yeah. Sneaky Snackers, of course, whenever you draw your 3rd card in a turn, return Sneaky Snacker from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So, when our deck is already running into a bunch of looting effects, so, discard a card to draw 2, or put the top 2 cards in your library, then from your library into your graveyard, then draw a card, just discard the Snacker. And then when you draw the additional card, bring the Snacker back into play for free. It's just a really tight interaction that doesn't require you to run additional swamps for it. You'll see that tons of red decks will play Sneaky Snackers without actually running any swamps.
Well, when your list doesn't need you to, because you pretty much discard and draw a bajillion cards, it's going to come back. But yeah, this is good for aggression, it's good for defense, it's recurable unless they have some sort of exile effect, which is pretty commonly run for graveyard hate. But I think you still run it right. And plus, this deck also gets to run Deep Analysis, which is another great card to mill into or discard into your graveyard to get that cheaper flashback cost to draw 2 cards. So, like Thomas was saying, we're going to draw a bit of cards. The other thing, too, is we got a new include from Avatar, Abandoned Attachments, which you may discard a card, and if you do, you get to draw 2, where we see that theme of drawing 2 cards. Plus, with all the mill, we're going to be putting good stuff in the graveyard. That's why we may want to hold those counter spells for the graveyard hate.
Something to be aware of for Abandoned Attachments, if this is your only card in hand and you cast it, since it reads you may discard a card if you do draw 2 cards, if you don't have a card to discard, you do not get to draw 2 cards. Worth knowing the interaction. Notably, a raw card.
Lots of things are raw cards. Lots of very draft chaff. But yeah, this list, I think we're just trading up for more control aspects with the creature removal. And the Gurmag Angler, I think we're just going to be able to probably drop one of these a game. Maybe more, but it's another good attacker, right? Or defensive piece. When you throw down a big creature and your opponents can't easily remove it, they don't swing as much.
So one thing about the Gurmag Angler that I don't like quite as much as the Cryptic Serpent is that the Gurmag Angler has Delve instead of having the cost reduced by the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. So if you cast your Gurmag Angler and then you have a Tolarian Terror drawn your next turn, you no longer have those cards in your graveyard to reduce the cost of your next spell, which can be a bit of a bummer. That said, 1 black is cheaper than 2 blue, so there is always that trade-off. One of the things I found super interesting about this deck, though, is that it's only running 5 black sources out of its 15 lands, which obviously they know something I don't know. I'm not out there top-8ing Paupergeddon, and you can count your Lorien Revealeds as 4 extra black sources, since the Contaminated Aquifer and Ice Tunnel are both searchable off of your Lorien Revealed. That does feel a little bit tight to me when you are running 4 Snuffouts, 3 Cast Downs, and 3 Gurmatic Anglers. I might personally be a bit more risk averse running a couple Swamps in addition.
I think that's personal preference. Comes into deck building a lot. But yeah, when you have like the Lorien Revealed, it gives you that safety to be able to go fetch one of those. The other thing is too, sure, the Thought Scour mills, but blue is the more important color because we want to draw a card. And yeah, you could mill one of those into your graveyard, but realistically, we only need to hit one. Snuff Out just needs us to have a swamp to be able to cast for free, and both Gurmag Angler and Cast Down are 1 pip. Blue is going to be the more predominant color. But are you ready to move on to that sideboard and see the graveyard hate I was talking about?
100%. And this might have more graveyard hate than any other deck we've looked at so far. We do still see the Annuls and the Steel Sabotages that we saw in our blue Terror deck, but we see the 2 Nile Spell Bombs here that I don't think we've seen in any of our other decks so far.
Not yet.
Other than that, I would love to see what cards we have in common with our Mono Blue Terror. And they're very similar decks. The biggest difference is that the Mono Blue Terror is running some Ponders and some Disrupts, where we're running more creature removal in our Dimir Terror deck. Obviously, the creatures are different. We knew that was going to be the case. Any other thoughts you have there, Titus?
Not so much, but one common theme you will see in sideboards is lifelink. And this one has Unexpected Fangs.
That makes perfect sense.
Gotta be aware.
Yeah, you gotta deal with mono red. Okay, let's go ahead and jump over to our 5th place deck. Congratulations to this player. We have Gruul Monsters from Fragnelli and Titus. I believe you've played against this deck a bit more than I have, so I'm going to let you jump in here.
So while I may not have necessarily played a lot against this list, it's pretty easy to understand. We are playing big creatures and we are getting the mana to be able to do so. We can take a look at our ramp package, which we have Wild Growth, which just produces a green, and then we have Utopia Sprawl, which can produce a color of a choice, and this will be our mana fixing if we don't see our red sources. The other thing is we have a dork that untaps a forest. So when you have all those enchantments on that said forest, we can produce 3, 4, 5 mana. Also if we have additional Arbor Elves. So we're going to burst into these larger creatures. They are also able to produce more mana for us. If we take a look at a lot of these cards, like the Eldrazi Repurposer, or the Jewel Thief, or the Writhing Chrysalis, the Repurposer and the Chrysalis produce Eldrazi Scions, which can be sacked for a colorless, but the Jewel Thief produces us a treasure. The other thing is, they're playing Boarding Party, which has Cascade. This is going to cascade into another lesser mana value spell, and it has Haste. The other one we can take a look at is this deck will be able to buff up other creatures for combat tricks. We can either do the Nyxborn Hydra, which is going to be a little bit slower if we want to bestow it, but I believe if we read Bestow, it should tell us when it becomes unattached, it becomes a creature again.
Correct. Yeah, if it falls off, it becomes a creature, and it keeps the counters.
the other one, we got a little bit of a removal with Ram Through, and then we can take a look at Malevolent Rumble, which is going to be some card selection, and what the deck likes to do is create mana. So the thing about the list is we're either going to be putting pressure on our opponents, or they're not going to want to swing through us. We can also take a look at Generous Ent, which can be, again, the mana fixing, or if you play it, get a food token. And food is pretty relevant in this format, as you can gain some life. Another cool card is the Bannerhide Crew Shock, which you can play as a threat. The other thing you can do is, I don't know if Reinforce is this sorcery speed? If it's not, these kind of effects can be combat tricks. If it's sorcery speed, it's just a good put a buff on your other creature. But the other thing we can do with it too, and since the deck is producing a good amount of mana, is if you lose this creature either to a Reinforce ability, or it just dies in combat, gets removed, is you can scavenge, which we're going to be able to make this creature, whatever we got on board, say even that little Arbor Elf, bigger to push through the remaining life total of our opponents.
So I believe Scavenge is sorcery speed. I think Reinforce would be able to be used as a combat trick, since discards reads like a channel effect to me.
It does to me as well.
That read to me like you can do it at instant speed.
Are we good to switch to Writhing Chrysalis?
Yes, absolutely. And one thing about Writhing Chrysalis, which I think is super interesting, is the Pauper committee said that this is a card they want to consider a banner card for the format, being a 4-cost creature that has this effect, being a signpost for the format moving forward. So anytime one of those 0/1 Eldrazi spawn tokens that Tyus has been talking about sacrifices, you get to put a 1/1 counter on the Writhing Chrysalis. I've played against this card a number of times, and it gets out of hand pretty quickly, especially if you're making those tokens off of the Malevolent Rumbles, and you're able to chain a couple of those together with some Eldrazi repurposers. It gets gross pretty quick. And one thing that I don't think you can underestimate here is the Avenging Hunter. The initiative is just a broken mechanic in any format that you can get it on the board. And with the big bodies that you have in this deck, it's pretty unlikely that anybody's ever going to be able to hit you back for a meaningful amount of damage. This deck is only running 2 red sources, but like you said, Titus, the Utopia Sprawls are going to be your mana fixing, and are probably going to be way more than up to the job for it, especially with the Generous Ents and Malevolent Rumbles available to help us with finding the lands that we need.
I think the sideboard is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. Weather the Storms being our life gain effect, you'll see that in pretty much every sideboard here. And I think the Breath Weapon is a really cool thing to point out. This being our sweeper for pretty much our asymmetrical board wipe here. This cleans up elves really well, which I think would be a pretty decent predator against this deck. And Gorilla Shaman is an interesting include here. I'm not entirely certain what that's for. Do you know?
Specifically hating on, not so much, but I mean, it's a creature, so it can be a body that you buff up, or you pick your choosing of non-creature artifacts. So I'm trying to think as well what would be the problem here. I mean, we already have Deglamer.
Yeah.
To be able to hate on artifacts or enchantments, so maybe they just wanted a 5th piece and they were teching in just one. But look, we have Relic of Progenitus.
Well, this deck is super sweet. I would actually love to try playing this deck at some point. This is the Timmy deck of the format for sure.
This is one of the ones I was looking at building as well.
Yeah, we have a local who you introduced me to who kicked my teeth in with this deck a couple weeks ago. So, yeah, super cool. Congratulations to Fragnelli on top 5. Up next, we have our first of the Mono Red Madness pilots from Nowak. And this deck is insanely fast. I got to play this deck yesterday with a buddy. We were planning on going to our local Pauper night, but we live in a state where it snows, and the roads were just ice last night, so we stayed in and ran a couple of these decks against each other. I played a round as Mono Red Madness. It was not a slow game. I think it was a turn 3 win. This deck burns fast. Your Gutter Snipes make it so that any instant or sorcery speed spell you cast deals an additional 2 damage to opponents. Kessig Flame Breather comes down 1 turn earlier and deals 1 damage to each opponent. Sneaky Snackers hit the boards for free, like we saw in our Dimir Terror deck. And your Vidalcan Epicure starts off by dealing a damage and creates a blood token which lets you filter your hand, potentially discarding one of your Sneaky Snackers. Then we have our Faithless Lootings, which is just your general loot effect. Highway Robbery, which was again another loot effect. But the really cool one here is Grab the Prize. I was so impressed with this deck or this card, Titus. If this is a loot effect that when you discard the card, if you discard a non-land card, it deals 2 damage to your opponent, which is wild. If you play this, discard, say, your Sneaky Snacker and you have a Gutter Snipe on the board, you're essentially drawing 2 cards, getting a Sneaky Snacker on the board, and dealing 4 damage for 2 mana. That's freaking powerful.
Agreed. Grab the Prize is a pretty good card, and even if you want to delay it for some reason, maybe set up for another turn, you can even plot the other one that has the loot effect, Highway Robbery.
Oh, 100%. You can cast it for free the following turn. That's super relevant, especially if you have like a setup turn where you know you're playing out your Gutter Snipe or your Kessig Flame Breather the following turn. That's just additional damage that you can have ready on the board.
I think the name of this deck's game is Consistency, as we also have Flashback on Faithless Looting.
Oh, 100%. And it's nice to be able to play that from the graveyard. But the namesake of the deck is Madness, and we're getting that from Fury Temper. So when you discard Fury Temper, you can cast this for 1 red instead of a colorless and 2 red. Deals 3 damage to target creature or player. You have Fire Blast, where you can sacrifice 2 mountains instead of playing its cost, dealing 4 damage to target creature or player. Lava Dart deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Flashback is sacrifice a mountain. And Lightning Bolt. The deck is not particularly subtle, but it gets you dead quick.
Alright, so this deck has a lot of consistency, but also we're probably not trying to go for the long game. While it might be able to, we're going to be willing to sacrifice our resources. So taking a look at like Lava Dart, getting rid of a land, or even Highway Robbery, because I believe Highway Robbery, you can also sacrifice a land. You can. Yeah. Mm-hmm. To be able to get that damage through. So we're not going to be too worried about going down on them. Same thing with Fire Blast, right? You can sacrifice 2 mountains to be able to cast this for free. I think we're just trying to get the opponent out of the game as quickly as possible to move on to the next run.
Yeah, 100%. And I can say that this deck felt so strong that the buddy I was playing with last night, after running this list, immediately put a order out to our local Pauper group asking for the cards he was missing. This is not here for a long time. It's here for a good time. You're trying to burn out your opponent pretty darn quick. The sideboard looks like it's kind of more of the same. One of the things that I thought was super cool in the sideboard, is it in this one? No, we'll see it in our top list, but we'll save that for later. But you'll see that there is some sweeper type effects here. Basically, some graveyard hate. and then some counter spells to try and make sure that your spells resolve. I'm guessing that the main predator for this deck right now, based off of the sideboard, is that Oops All Spells deck, the Spy deck, and that's what they're worried about. Because that deck is a little more quick, or a little more consistent and quick.
So when we look at these cards, free is the name of the game. Look at Fairy Macabre. We can do this at instant speed, to my knowledge, because it doesn't otherwise specify. And the other thing, too, is Tormod's Crypt.
Sorry, 1 second. On Fairy Macabre, I had no idea that was a common. That's kind of wild. This deck, that card was being run in Legacy to deal with Oops All Spells and Dimir Reanimator.
Solid.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild include. I think that's super cool.
I think it's kind of like pick what you would like to play, because I've seen a variety of decks like vary their graveyard hate for this format, and it kind of goes between Relic if you can run Nile, Spellbomb, or maybe we just throw in a Tormod's Crypt. And I think there could be a few other things. Thraben Charm hits graveyards too. So there are some options depending on what you're playing. But even taking this deck into consideration with the Kessig Flame Breather, that one says non-creature versus the Gutter Stipe, which is instant or sorcery. So if you have that out, we're also pinging our opponents again. The same thing too with Pyroblast and Red Blast. We're also defending while attacking. So we get some of that added benefit, but the one that doesn't make you have to target a blue spell can, if I am correct, be able to be used more flexibly, because we can just cast that to get some more damage off of Gutter Snipe and Kessig Flame Breather.
Yes, that is 100% correct. Thank you. I had to visualize that. That would be a use case for Pyroblast over Red Elemental Blast here, and that would explain why there's 4 and 2 versus vice versa. So that's some creative thinking here in this list.
This list also does hate kind of on the go wide. It's got Electricry and End the Festivities.
Cast into Fire hits that similar role as well.
And I've noticed the exile or get rid of the artifact, because there are some indestructible artifacts this format can utilize. It's pretty relevant as well.
Awesome. Do you have an example of that off the top of your head?
Besides lands, not too much. I feel like there was something, it just unfortunately is not coming to mind.
Hey, lands are always relevant.
Hold on, there is an opponent who plays a graveyard deck, Paupertron.
Let's move on. Awesome. Well, congratulations to Nowak. This is a really sweet Mono Red Madness deck. Moving on to our third place deck, we have Cawgate again from Pelliccia. This deck looks pretty similar to our 7th place Cawgate's deck. Rather than running through this one, I'm going to do the compare feature in Moxfield. And we'll see how these are structured differently. So instead of running an Outlaw Medic and a island, well, they've cut a copy of Outlaw Medic and an island compared to the 7th place deck, and they're running 2 Spell Pierces in that slot. So just a bit more control for a bit less damage and lands. It looks like our sideboards are where we have a decent amount of difference here, with the 7th place deck running a lot more counter magic in their sideboards, and our 3rd place deck running some Crimson Fleet Commodores, which will allow you to become the Monarch, a couple of Dust to Dust, 4 copies of Dust to Dust, a card that I hate when Titus plays against me, and a couple of Remove Souls. So, very cool deck here. I don't really have much to add on this list. Do you, Titus?
Not so much. I think, like we were seeing, is the sideboard. Yeah. Just preferences, right?
100%. I do like seeing 2 Spell Pierces in the main, though. I do think that is relevant. I think Spell Pierce is a little underrepresented here. especially with mono red being the boogeyman of the weekend. So, congratulations, Pelliccia. Moving on to our second place list, we have Bergamini's Familiars. And I have to say, this is the list that I think I want to play moving forward. I played this last night against a buddy when we were doing the finals match back-to-back, and this list speaks to me. It is a twiddle deck at its core, where you are just taking a million little actions that give you just incremental value, but don't really progress the game state, which, probably isn't the most fun to play against, if I'm honest, but that's whatever. We're neither here nor there. This deck functions through Sunscape Familiar, which reduces your blue spells by 1 generic. We also are running Archaeomancer, which lets you return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. Godfarrow's Faithful as a 4-of, so whenever you cast a blue spell, you gain a life, so we're essentially pre-boarded for red decks. And as our primary engine, we have 3 Muldrifters. So, what's really cool about Muldrifter in this deck is that when you evoke a Muldrifter by paying 2 and a blue, or with a familiar out, 1 and a blue, you can draw your 2 cards from the ETB, and in response to the evoke trigger, you can ephemerate it, or you can ghostly flicker it. This is going to make it so that it bounces or exiles, fizzling the evoke trigger, and then it'll re-ETB, and you draw 2 more cards, which is pretty nasty. And I'm a huge fan of that. With this deck, you are going to always hit your land drops. You're always going to have a full grip of cards. So when you're looking at, whoever you're playing against, you're going to have a handful of prohibits, negates, snaps to deal with whatever they're presenting as you're furthering your game plan and hopefully winning eventually through your Murmuring Mystic, where you're creating 1/1 birds through each instant and sorcery that you're casting.
Yeah, I really like this list as well. It's got a few of my favorite things going on, like what you brought up with Muldrifter, being able to respond to that evoke trigger, and getting a more permanent creature extra value. The other thing is, I really do like Archaeomancer. We can loop with it with the flicker effects, or even the bounce back. That one might be a little bit slower. But the other thing that is fun about this deck is, look at that toughness on a lot of these creatures.
Big booties all around. These don't die to lava darts.
No, they can sacrifice a lot of land, so maybe they'll get somewhere. The other cool thing you can do is Meeting of Minds is instant speed Convoke, correct? So when we're making all those little birds, Convoke does not require those creatures to not have summoning sickness.
No, it does not. So when you have 2 birds off of your Murmuring Mystic and a Sunscape Familiar out, you're essentially 1 blue, draw 2 cards. It's not exactly Ancestral Recall, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, this is a pretty cool deck. It's definitely within that controlling nature. Are we ready to move on to the sideboard?
One more thing I want to point out about the lands before we jump into the sideboard is that we have a Mortuary Mire, which lets you put a creature from your graveyard on top of your library. So if you lose access to your Sunscape Familiars or your Murmuring Mystics, you can recur them. And if you get into the late game and you are flooding out, you can cycle your Contaminated Landscapes to draw an additional card, which is kind of nice and was relevant in a couple of my games. We also have the Azorius Chanceries. So for your snaps, you can generate absurd amounts of mana by tapping 2 Azorius Chanceries for 4 mana, snap for a blue, untap your 2 Azorius Chanceries, and have 3 additional mana available after that. Tap them for 2 more, suddenly you have 7 mana off of spending 1. It's pretty nuts. Now I'm good for sideboards. Sorry about that.
No worries, and that was worth talking about. Lands have some relevance. I think we need to look at what they can do.
So for our sideboard, there are going to be some similarities for a bunch of the other decks that we've seen so far. Again, we see the Dust to Dust. That's going to be for our affinity decks, for our Tron decks. We're also going to see our Hydroblasts for our red decks. But other than that, we're seeing a little bit more control. Essence Scatter, Negates, Last Breath to exile some creatures. And I'm not familiar with Stonehorn Dignitary. I don't think we've seen that before.
I like it.
You like it?
Look at it. Read it. What are your thoughts?
When Stonehorn Dignitary enters the battlefield, target opponent skips his or her next combat phase. Oh, that hits Gruul monsters pretty hard.
Yeah.
That's kind of nice. That's really nice, especially if you're creating big mana with this deck. That is a clever solution. That's pretty cool. And then a Thraben Charm, which we've seen in a couple other decks. All right, any other thoughts on this, Titus?
I think there's some cool things that you'll be able to figure out in games with whatever you need to bounce or blink, whether it's your opponent's stuff or your stuff. I think it's a solid list. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I'm going to steal this list. Thank you, Bergamini. This is awesome. All right, finally, best for last, we have Posterino's Red Madness. This is the deck that won Paupergeddon. Congratulations, Posterino. This deck is going to be fairly similar to the other Mono Red Madness deck that we looked at today. You can see we have Gutter Snipes, Kessig Flame Breathers, Sneaky Snackers, Vidalian Epicures, the same sorceries, the same instants, and maybe different lands. We're going to go ahead and do the compare feature on Moxfield, and we can see that our 4th place deck was running 1 additional Gutter Snipe versus Posterino is running a Faithless Looting over that. And I have to say, I kind of agree with this. The Gutter Snipes felt a little hard to get down on the board to me, so having a Faithless Looting I think is a little bit better in that slot.
Yeah.
If we look at our sideboards, we can see that our 4th place deck was leaning way heavier on a diverse plan for Graveyard Hate, and Posterino has has this Flaring Pain. This is the one that I want to point out to you as being in this deck, because this was really painful to deal with. Damage can't be prevented this turn with Flashback a red. I think I maybe had misread this in our game, if I'm honest.
Oh, how'd you interpret that?
I think I was looking at a different version of this card, and I read it as you cannot gain life somehow, which clearly is not what that says, so maybe we're just bad at Magic. Anyway, very cool deck. Congratulations to all of our top 8 for Paupergeddon. I would very much love to make it to one of these some days. But I am also very much feeling inspired to put together a Pauper deck to maybe bring to MagicCon Vegas this year to participate in the tournament there. I will be going this year. I can't speak for Titus yet, but hopefully we'll get him out there this year to one of them.
Well, let's see what fate brings. But as looking at these lists, right, something I wanted to bring up, because there's a very diverse, sure, there's similarity between the lists, and I think we can each see what flavor of cards that a player likes in their sideboard. I've looked at a lot of lists before that were very similar, but they had some diverse sideboard options. But Do you feel like pretty much any deck has a chance to either top eight or get a first placement?
In this format, 100%. We have a ton of diversity that we've seen over the last three Paupergeddons. And I think that's only going to continue to be the case. I love this format. And when we were looking at the meta share, we saw that it was incredibly diverse and incredibly open. We had to get down to, I believe, the 15th deck before we got into the 2%. So you can show up to any of these events with Brewer's advantage. And you can see that Cawgate, which had 3% of the field on day one, showed up as two of the top 8 decks. Like, if you're willing to put in the work and you want to show up and grind, I think you're fine to do so in this format. This feels very cEDH to me, as opposed to like Modern, which is a little more solved.
Yeah, and do you think one of the things that I thought about is, do you think these players are just picking up something they enjoy, or that, some people decide maybe for a standard event what they think might be like one of the best decks to play? Do you think these players are just picking whatever their preference is at the time, or they're making like calls?
So, since Pauper is such a cheap format, I think that the players who are coming to win are coming with decks that they think are going to win. I think that people can show up because it is, the weekend that they are going to Eternal Weekend to go and hang out with their homies, and they want to go and play Boggles. There's nothing wrong with that. Show up, have fun, 03 drop or whatever that is for you. No shame in that. That's probably what I'm going to do when I go to my next Pauper tournament. But I do think that, if you know something, or you have like a deck that will perform for you that may not be a meta deck, that you can show up and you can have a real chance. I think Cawgate has been consistently showing that's the truth.
I've noticed Cawgate show up quite a few times, and I know that that's something that might be in your wheelhouse. For me, it's not something I'm quite interested in, but I'm glad that it's definitely an option that we have to choose from. For me, I'd probably be a little bit more towards that Gruul, like monsters or big mana, maybe even like a burn deck, something a little bit more aggressive, but I also like the control side. I'm with you on the Azorius.
Yeah, I mean, you know me, I play Altertron currently, but the decks that I'm looking at that are speaking to me are definitely that Familiars deck and the Blue Terror deck. Those fit a bit more in my playstyle. So,
all right, if you were to go to a big event, would you play Tron?
if I was going to play to have fun and hang out, I would play Tron. If I was going to try to win, I would practice more on a different deck.
Fair enough.
Any closing notes for us today, Titus?
Right now, I think that, if you want a 60 card format to get into and you haven't picked one up, I think this is a great one. And the other thing as well, even if you are in one, I think that this is fairly easy to get into, and decks are super cheap. No reason why not.
Yeah, I think that Standard's super fun right now, and that's where my focus has been. But every single deck we've covered today, you can buy for less than the cost of a Biotra Mole Cub. So
I was going to say that.
These decks are super fun. They're super powerful. I would wholeheartedly say pick one up. And that's coming from cEDH player. Anyway, if you stayed with us this long, please consider giving us a like, follow, or comment, depending on how you found us. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to each other. It's just a game.